start recording, and we'll go here, and I'll highlight me or spotlight me so you can see what's going on. So the first thing, I'm gonna tie one and then
Something happened to your sound, Dave. It's gone wonky.
Yeah, it's his internet connection in the doghouse.
And by honking a standard hook and bending up on it. It hasn't, up until this week, it hasn't been a problem. Are you still having problem hearing me? Yeah. Oh, darn it. Let me get rid of this.
We could hear you when you asked us if we could hear you, but then it went wonky again.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to relocate.
But you're fine now. You're fine now.
Yeah, but it seems like the minute I go to Spotlight, it does something to the video. Can you hear me still, or can you see me?
You're good.
Yeah, it's on and off. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I think once you spotlight,
I'm gonna have to so Florin, why don't you do yours and then I'll relocate?
Okay, fair enough. I'll do this. Let me just refocus my camera and get going.
Florin, while you're refocusing, you remember we had a discussion about these plier hackles. Did anybody find a source?
Hackle Pliers.
no, this is those little test clips. Yes,
Oh, the test clips. Well,
I actually went online and I did actually find them. And yes, you get them in multiple colors and different sizes. There's a whole bunch. So I know Dave had mentioned the company as well, and I think I may actually have it open right now. But there were piles of them in different colors and sizes. So if you're interested, then either Dave or I, we can get that sorted out.
Yeah, I am interested in getting some different color ones.
Okay.
If I have to order a half a dozen or more, let me know.
Okay. And what size? Because I don't know what size Dave had bought before.
I prefer the smaller size. We're locked out there at the moment, but it's only about 3 inches or 4 inches.
Oh, it's that long.
Well, it's not, it's smaller than the one Dave was using.
Okay, because
For sure.
there are ones where the whole clip is less than 2 inches long. Those are the tiny ones, the micro ones.
Yeah.
Internet's fucking up again.
I'll measure this one. Are they in centimeters or in the inches?
They have them in inches. They may have the metric as well. I'm not sure measurements, but they definitely have them in inches because that's what I had seen.
okay,
My wife-
we can talk about the test clips
Okay.
in a moment.
You ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll. My camera is focused, my thread's on, and the hook is in the vise.
Sounds good.
So this is a size, actually this one, because I'm doing 6 hooks in size 10, where I experimented with the lead on top of the shank of the hook, and then I went down one size to a size 12, where I've put some offset beads. Now, with these offset beads, and the reason why I like to prepare these hooks ahead of time, it's a little bit tedious, and it's much better you do like half a dozen hooks at one go or more if you're going to tie more flies, is the following. So you might see on camera here, there's just a little bit of thread right at the eye of the hook. So I do a little buildup of thread to slide the bead over, and then I do another little buildup of thread behind the bead to fasten it in place. Now, to be extra sure that this thing isn't budging, you might put a drop of instant glue here on the thread before you slide the bead on, and the experience is going to tell you how much thread you want there. That's why using a thicker thread here, like a 3/0, for example, would be appropriate on a hook this big. And so what I do is I do what I just told you. I put a little bit of super glue here, slide the bead on, and then make sure, look at it from all directions to make sure that it is as centered as possible on the hook, and then just set it aside and let it dry, and then this thing isn't going to move afterwards. All right, so now I'm assuming we've got a batch of hooks prepared to tie the fly, and I'm going to go on with tying the fly. So attach the thread and move to somewhere around the midpoint of the hook shank. And what you need here is some moose hair that's long enough to allow you to do everything on the fly from the same little bundle of hair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick here and cut a relatively small, you don't want too much, you just want to think, so when you cut the hair off the hide, what you should be thinking about is have enough hair to do the wing case. That's your main concern at this point. It's way too much for tails. Oh, don't worry about that. We'll deal with that problem. Okay, so here's a bundle of hair, misaligned. There's a little bit of fuzz here. So just clean off the fuzz with your fingers. No, nothing complicated. This is easy to do. Even in dry Alberta, it's not a problem. And then what you want to do is take these hairs and stack them. After all, you still want tails out of it. So stick it in a stacker. It's a bit challenging because these are fairly long, so you may want to use a larger stacker. And if there are extra hairs here, this can be cleaned up after stacking as well. So give it a few taps. Hold it nice and horizontal. Grab the hairs by the tips. And now for the final cleanup. So firmly grab in one hand and just clear off anything that's left there. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure a tail. So I measure it to go beyond the hook point as long as I want it. Some of us like shorter tails, some of us like longer tails. I'm somewhere in between these two. And then what we're going to do is just transfer to the other hand once the measurement is done. So this transfer is going to ensure that your clump of hair stays exactly in that same spot, like this. And then do a couple of soft loops on the hair. If it spins a little around the hook, don't worry about it. Okay. So now I'm going to go back towards the back end of the hook and start wrapping over the hair. Now, this is obviously a ridiculous amount of hair for tails on a stonefly. So what I'm going to do is, and I'm doing this before I reach the point, the normal point where I would be attaching the tail fibers for a nymph, right? So I just go here with scissors or something, and I separate some of the fibers to bring the size of these tails to something closer to what I'm aiming for. And again, experience will tell you how much you want. I think I'm happy with this amount of hair here for tail. And then I continue wrapping, going back to the normal tie-in point for a tail, which is around, if you look at where your thread is hanging, the thread should be hanging near to where the barb of the hook used to be before crimping. Okay, if you think I haven't gone far enough, there's room to go a little further. All right, the next ingredient is a rib. And here I have some medium thick copper wire. And I'm going to set this against the tying point here, a length about equal to the abdomen of the fly. So this is going to give me enough length to secure the rib properly. And I'm attaching it on my side of the hook. So sorry, I wasn't trying to hide things from you. So just leave it hanging there. And then here going forward, you want to make sure that you're not having too large of an abdomen. So at this point, there are two things to be done here. One is, remember, I'm trying to tie this fly upside down. So if I leave the hair here, I'm going to get the wing case on the wrong side of the fly. So remember to bring these fibers down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab them and hold them down and do a few wraps going forward to the point where I'm satisfied. So here I have enough room for a thorax. I've got a long enough abdomen, and I've secured my hair in the right place. Okay, so this is now not going to get in the way, or at least that's the hope. Okay. And back to the tail. Now I just need some dubbing, and you can use whatever you like. In this particular case, I have some brown. You can choose a lighter color. You can choose a darker color. There are various shades. I'm going to go with this so-called fiery brown. The labels are not always, this is also labeled fiery brown, and this is supposedly fiery brown, and this is supposedly fiery brown, and they're clearly not the same color. So it's a good idea to have enough packages of seal fur. That's another material that I've been worried about disappearing for many years now, and it hasn't. So I'm happy to be proven wrong. So now all I'm doing is I'm just dubbing some seal fur on the thread. You can do, if you want, a very tight dubbing, which I don't think is the idea for this nymph. If you want very tight dubbing, you can always use a dubbing loop. If I didn't use a wire rib, I would probably be tempted to put in a dubbing loop here, because it prevents the fly from getting a little too shaggy. This is also another place where I wouldn't be opposed to using some dubbing wax, but the way I would use it is I would simply, since we had a conversation about this before, the way I would use it, so let's say you have a little tin of dubbing wax. It really doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's not too sticky. So this is called extra tacky wax, but it's not that tacky. Actually, I can rub a finger on the wax, just so that my fingers, when I rub my fingers together, they don't feel slippery. That's it. You can't see, otherwise you can't see that I put any wax on my fingers. Okay? And then with these slightly waxed fingers, I go and twist the dubbing on my thread. And that usually helps. Okay, and then I just dub a body. This is standard technique here. I'm not showing you anything you don't know. And I said these are out of the way, but apparently they're not very keen on being out of the way. So if you have fibers that really bug you, you don't really need all that much hair there. Come on. And build the abdomen of the fly. If this thing is getting off the thread, you can always go back, and for some reason I find it easier to twist. I know I should be twisting the opposite direction, but I find it easier to twist in this direction and then do it more often. Okay, if that's not enough, you can always add a little dab. And kind of build a correct shape for the body. And then move the thread to the front. All right, at this point, just take the wire, so the rib, and rib the abdomen. Move this forward. And I'm really having problems with this hair today. I guess that's what a bad hair day means. And once you've secured the wire, it's always best to just break it by rotating it. Okay. At this point, I don't want to tie in this position. I'm going to flip the hook over. It's going to make my life a lot easier. If you have a rotary vise that's properly aligned, so that this one is not at a right angle for doing that, making that move, of course you can just flip it over. So having a proper rotary vise set up for rotary tying does make life easier here. All right, and now for the last part, simply take more dubbing and build up the thorax. So start right here and build up nicely. This is one of those few cases where you will need a little bit more dubbing, but always erring on the side of using less dubbing is the better way to proceed. You can always take it down if you started with too much. Okay, and I'm leaving just a little bit of room here behind the bead so I can do the rest of the job. So now is my wing case. So a couple of turns to secure, then a few turns right behind the bead. And now what I want to do is I want to select 3-4 fibers on either side. So remember, this is now the upside side of the fly. So here's some fibers on one side. And here are some fibers. Should pluck some of the longer ones on the other side. Oh, come on. Well, all right. It looks like I've got too many of the short hairs here. And I am just going to go and clean some of them up. So you can have a choice of two procedures. One is to just yank them. The really short ones, when you get into this wider part, you know, like the lighter colored part of the moose hair, it's fairly fragile, so you can just yank on it and it'll go. Okay. So this is it's quite a mess. All right, so let's see. I have a few fibers on this side. I have a few fibers. You can always reduce the number of fibers if you discover that you've taken too many of them. Okay, so now I've separated the ones for the legs, and I'm going to deal with them later. And now I just want to make sure that they're not pointing in some funny direction. Okay, so I'm just working here. It's like a little transition between the wing case and the bead. All right, so this is what I have right now. I know it does look like a little mess. Now, if you can just leave it at this and whip finish, or if you don't like that much exposed thread there, just take a little dab of dubbing and dub the thread prior to doing the whip finish. This is also going to get you legs that are going to sit a little better because you're building a little bit of bulk there, making it a little less obvious. And then the whip finisher. Three turns, 1, 2, 3. Trim. And then for the final step, just turn this whichever way you like in the vise. Measure the length of the legs, about this far, and trim. And that's the fly. And then the rest of it beyond this point is just a matter of, you know, cleaning up. If you're looking at these hairs and you're saying, well, you know, this is a little excessive, or you're taking pictures or anything like that, maybe you want to do that. But otherwise, this is the nymph, and it's going to get a little shaggy when you fish it. This is what happens with the seal fur. And that's okay because it's part of the effect. The only thing I don't like on these things is I don't want to have big hairs sticking out too much. I just want the fuzziness to be more closer to the body of the fly. Okay, so this is the downside, the lower side, and the underside, and this is the upper side. Now, for extra strength, you might contemplate here. On dub flies like this, I try to keep the Sally Hansens at a safe distance, because it just, once you get that hair matted, it just loses its magic. But here, I guess you could risk a drop precisely placed of some kind of head cement to strengthen that that wing pad, because this hair is reasonably fragile. And that's it. If you want golden stones, you know, you just tie this thing on slightly higher, slightly larger hooks. If you want salmon flies, again, you do the same thing. But generally speaking, the size 10-12, even for the larger stones, is a good size. So I would use this in a lot of circumstances, and I think this might work in a pinch also for golden stones. Just maybe go with a different color wire to give it a different different contrast, a bit more gold in there rather than copper. Vary the shade of color used for the dubbing, right? So I would use something a little lighter for the abdomen, and then the darker brown for the thorax. Kind of stick with the same idea. And that's the fly. Dave, I think you're next, and you're having the good connection there. You're still muted though.
Stop that. Yeah, there we go. You didn't want to hear me cursing in the background.
No, much better now.
There we go.
Much better. Yeah.
This is not ideal because I have a different, I have a pedestal in here right now, and usually use the clamp type vise, but the clamp doesn't fit the table well. I have to piss around with it. So it's going to sit a little higher. You're going to be able to see not see my face as much in order to see the fly. So this is what's called a Klinkhammer. As I started talking before, Hans van Klinken is the inventor. He was a Dutch guy who did a bunch of fishing up in Finland and Sweden. And he found that these emerging mayflies worked really good if they were sitting right in the surface film with part of the body extending down below the surface film. So to create the fly, he took a standard hook and bent it a short ways back from the eye and tied the post for a post style fly on the flat part. Now you can still get the hooks that he originally worked with Partridge to create a manufactured hook. So I'll tie the second fly on that. But what you guys, if you want to get these hooks from Robinson's, this is the one that you get. It's a Hackle Klinkhammer. You can get them down to like 14s and 16s. I'm going to tie it on a 12 so that you can see better a little what's going on. So I'll put the hook in the vise, and this will require from time to time manipulating where the hook is in the vise and how it sits. So initially, I'm going to tie the biot or the body on the fly first. And to do that, I'm going to tie this, put the hook in the vise so the eye of the hook is pointing down slightly. And the reason for that is that I want to get right back into the very bend of the hook with my thread. Now, for a lot of Klinkhammers, they use dubbing or just thread for the abdomen of the fly. And I thought I'd show you a different technique that I originally learned from Roman Sherabin with his fly called the RS Quad. And it uses a goose biot. So I'm going to start the thread, again, relatively behind the eye. I'm going to dress the hook with thread all the way down and get it all the way down to way down the bend and around the corner until it's basically where the barb would have been after I pinched the barb off. Now a biot comes from a goose primary flight feather, and this is what it looks like. And it comes off the leading edge of the primary. And they look like they're short when you look in here, when you look at them straight. But if you pull them out, they're actually quite long. So in order to get the biot, what I'll do is I'll pull back on here, and I will pull the biot, pull it right off the stem. The reason I pull it off the stem is you see this little tag end here. It has a little bit of a notch in it on the leading edge. I'll see if I can get it close enough for you to see. Right here, there's a little notch, and that'll help you determine what orientation to put that feather, that biot in when you tie it into the hook. Because if you tie it notch up and notch down, you don't, or you get a different effect from the rib. So in this case, here's the notch on the bottom. What I want to do is turn it over so the notch is on the top. And I'm going to tie it in by the tip on the near side of the hook. A couple of wraps like that to hold it in and tie the tip right down to the hook shank. I'm not going to bother trimming it off. Might get on there. And I'm going to take my thread all the way up to where the wing would normally go and a couple of wraps to get it right to the eye of the hook. Now with my hackle pliers, I grab the end of the biot with my hackle pliers. And the first wrap is important. What I want to do is be careful to wrap that first wrap around the hook shank so that this thin edge, you can see there's a thin edge and a thick edge to that biot. I want the thin edge pointing forward. And I'm going to make touching wraps, just one close to the other, all the way up the hook shank. And you can see that there's that little edge, thicker edge of the biot makes a rib that sticks out. And by wrapping it just a little teeny bit of an overlap, I get this nice spiral rib up the shank of the hook. When I get there, I just unwrap the thread a little bit to where the biot is finishing, bring it up and tie it off with a couple of good wraps on the top. And then two in front. And then then I trim off the excess. So that's how you tie a biot body. And you can see here that I've got these little ribs of biot that stick out. That's the beauty of it. It makes a nice compact body with a rib without adding any extra weight. Now, I'm going to reposition the hook slightly in the vise so that now that the top part of the hook, the eye end of the hook, is horizontal. This is where I'm going to put the wing. I'm going to place the thread halfway between the eye and where the ribs on the biot stopped. The wing is going to be a product that I'm using. It's a polyethylene. It's called Parapost, and it says it's water shed treated. So it's going to be, must have something on it. They must have put something on it to cause it to shed water. I'm only going to use a little bit here. I don't need a whole whack. So about a couple of inches of it. I wrap it around the thread and then bring it up and tie it down right smack on top of the hook, in between the eye, halfway in between the eye and the biot body. A couple of wraps in front, a couple of wraps behind. Now I need to do what's called post the wing, which means I now need to wrap the thread all around and around and around the wing horizontally. And the easiest way to do that is I hold it up with my right hand, bring the thread around, catch it with my fingers here so it doesn't pull down every time I wrap. And I'm going to make 4 or 5 wraps up that post, one on top of the other. When I get the last one, I'm just going to let it hang straight down on the far side of the hook. So now you see I've got this poly that sticks straight up with a little bit of thread post right there. At that point, I'm going to shorten this up just a little bit so it's not in the way. Now I'm going to tie the hackle in. And for this guy, I'm going to use a nice saddle hackle. I want the barbules on the saddle hackle to be at least 1.5, at least gap, and maybe 1.5 gap size. I don't mind having a fairly large hackle on this. So I get it down to the point where I stripped it back so you can see the barbules. I'm going to strip off the fuzzy part at the bottom. So I've now got exposed hackle stem here. Nice and cleanly exposed. Trim that off so that there's only about a little more than 1/8 of an inch that's sticking out of bare hackle stem. Hold it on the near side of the hook and get a wrap in front of the wing and a wrap behind and another wrap behind. And then I'm going to tie down the stem and just trim out any onto the shank and trim out any excess. This is what secures the hackle stem to the hook shank so that when you're trying to wrap it, it's not gonna pull out. Pull the hackle straight up, parallel to the wing, and give it a little poke with your finger to bend it there. And once again, I'm going to go around the post 3 or 4 times with the thread. Bring the thread around and let it hang on the far side of the hook. So now I've got the post tied in with the wing, with the hackle tied in with the wing post. I got a little piece of hackle sticking out there. I want to get rid of it. There we go. At this point, I'm going to make the thorax. And for the first one, I'm going to use something fairly simple and straightforward, which is a nice fuzzy peacock herl. Same thing, I'm going to wrap that around the thread, bring it up behind the post, a couple of wraps there, and then bring the thread in front. And I'm going to wrap around the hook shank with the peacock herl to make a nice fuzzy thorax, both behind and in front of the wing. So I get a couple of wraps in front, couple behind, and behind again. Bring my thread back behind the wing and wrap down through that peacock herl to cinch it really good. Pull the peacock herl out to the side so it's not going to get trapped up with the hackle. And I'm going to just slide my scissors down and trim it off short. Now I leave my thread hanging down the far side of the hook. I'm going to wrap my hackle around the wing post horizontally. And every wrap I want to go underneath the previous wrap. So I'm going to pull down the hackle as I go around the sides and up and over the eye, down underneath, over the back, down underneath, over the eye. And 3 or 4 wraps is probably good. Doesn't matter if your hackle is a little bit fuzzy in the sense that fairly thick. Now, when I get to this point, I'm going to pull that hackle straight down, take my thread up and wrap around the post the same way I did the hackle, down on the far side, over the eye, down on the near side, over the body. Do that about 3 or 4 times and let the thread hang on the far side of the hook again. Pull the hackle stem out to the side and just slide my scissors down the stem and give it a little snip. Come on, get in there. This is tight quarters. There we go. Now I have the hackle that's going round and round and round that stem. And what I want to do is the same thing with my whip finish. To make it a little easier, I take the hook out, turn it so that the straight part of the hook where the hat is pointing straight out to the side. You see that? Take my whip finisher, and I'm going to do the same thing with the whip finish. I'm going to wrap it underneath the hackle, all the way around. 3 or 4 wraps. Pull it in there and get in here and trim the thread with this side of it. Oops. Now I might need just a little bit of cleanup here. I don't want any hackle sticking below the thorax. So I'm just going to trim any hackle that got trapped pointing down and trim them off so that there's no hackle sticking below the thorax. It just goes horizontally around the fly. And that's him. Now, if you think that that post is a little tall, I'm just going to trim that off a little bit. So that's the first version of the Klinkhammer. I'm going to do another one. This one is going to use the partridge hook. And this one is a size 18. But partridge, their 18s are somebody else's 16s or 14s. Because it's an 18, but I'll guarantee you it looks like a larger hook than the one I just tied on that was a 12. Whoop, that was not good. I'm gonna have to get a magnet to find that later. Now this partridge hook, you'll see, has a completely different shape to it. Instead of just being an extremely bent hook, it actually has a straight flat part before the body bends down. And this is where I'm going to tie the wing. I'm going to start with the wing this time. Worry about the biots later. Start right behind the eye and work back to where that bend is. And the reason I'm starting the wing first is this time I'm going to use what's called a turkey flat for the wing. Comes in a little package like that. Not precisely sure where it comes off the turkey, but this is what a turkey flat looks like. And the beauty of these turkey flats is they're nice and even across the top like that. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I have all of the fibers nicely melded together there. Then I'm going to take a section out right at the very tip. So see, I just took that little V section out. Now I'm going to cut the wing out that I'm going to use. It's about, I'd say, 1/4 inch for this fly. I come in here and get my scissors right in up against the stem and snip that. So that I end up with a V-shaped thingy with the stem in the middle. And here's where a little trick you have to play with is I want to fold the hackle around that stem so that take the tips and push them together. I'm folding them around the stem. This can be a little tricky. So that all of the tips are lined up. on both sides. I still have that little piece of stem there, but all the tips are lined up. I'm going to measure the wing from the eye of the hook to the bend. Put my thread right smack in the middle of that flat part on the hook, and come in here and wrap over top with my thread a couple or 3 times. So now I have the wing sticking out the front. At this point, I take my scissors and cut at an angle the butt end right down the shank and wrap that butt end down. What this does is it creates a little bit of a tapered piece of thorax right behind where the wing is. Pull the wing up in the front and wrap around it in the front to stand it up. And then I'm going to do what I did with the parapost. I'm just going to do a very light couple wraps around this turkey flat to make it stand up. Now this is actually a little easier to handle in some ways than the parapost because there's some bulk to those fibers. Got a couple of mallards sticking out there. And wrap my thread all the way down the hook shank. To the bend again. Now, when I get to where the wrapping perpendicular to the shank, I get to where the thread is just where the hook shank point is. I'm going to adjust it in the vise again so that it's vertical. And I've got another turkey quill. I'm going to pull the wire off the turkey quill. And this time again, you can see where that little notch is. Just for fun, I'm going to show you the difference when you turn the notch down. Take the point of that and tie it on the near side of the hook. Wrap the tip down right up to where the thorax from the wingtip ended. Make sure it's good, solid. Wrap my thread all the way up to the thorax. Once again, there's the little notch on the top. Grab it with the hackle pliers and make that first wrap around to make sure it's the right way around. And again, wrap around, and you'll see with this that the flat part of this is going, this skinny part of the butt's going the right way around. When I get right behind the wing, I'm going to tie that down. Again, tie in front. And trim it clear. Reposition the hook a little again because I'm working on the flat part now. This time I'm going to use a grizzly hackle, and I'm going to just take the tip end of this because I don't need the thicker part. Do the same thing as I did the last time, but just strip this back so I can see how much it's sticking out. Pull about 1/4 inch of fibers off the end and tie it in right behind the wing again with a little bit of stem left over pointing to the back. Because what I want to do with this is wrap that stem around the post. So around, hold the stem up and get the far side. No, it's not working for me today. There we go. I got it. There we are. Right around the post. And I only need 3 or 4 wraps of thread just to snug it up on the post. And then get the thread around right at the base of the post and let it hang down the far side. This time I'm going to make the thorax with a little bit of light colored dubbing. And I've got a mixture here of antron, fine antron, of white and sort of an orangish, because I want it to match sort of match the thorax. I want the thorax to kind of the same color, but maybe a little darker. And I don't need much dubbing, I'll tell you. You just need a teeny little bit on the thread here. So you see, you maybe make the dubbing the thread twice as thick as the thread. So a very fine dubbing rope. And wrap behind, and then in front. Now I've got the dub body, and I'll do the same thing with the hackle. I'm going, there's a little bit of dubbing sticking out there. That up. So again, I wrap right around the post, over the top of the eye, pull down over the back of the hook, pull down over the eye, pull down. And each time I'm going to make it as snug as I can stand without that post wiggling too far. Hold it straight down on the far side. Take my thread and go around the post again, over the eye, and over the eye, and under, down over the hook at the back and down. Do that 2 or 3 times. And then again, pull this right out to the side so I can see where it is, and come in here and trim. My hands are shaky today. Come on, can't see what I'm doing. Let's try from this side. There we go. There we are. And again, once I've got that done, I'm going to make it so that the post is going horizontal by repositioning the hook. Get my whip finisher, and again, wrapping around the base of the post and over top of the eye. Just have to be careful where you put those wraps. And snug it up. Come on, there we go. And there we have the next one. I think I kind of pooched that whip finish a bit. Kind of trapped up the hackle. Anyway, that's the general idea. The hackle is now horizontal around the post. I got a couple of bits of mallard sticking out here.
Dave, what was the feather of the hackle?
The hackle is a grizzly hackle, just a grizzly saddle.
Oh, okay.
So there's the other Klinkhammer. So that's just to give you some idea of the varieties of things you can do with this hook and what the different hooks look like and how to tie a body. So the key with this is being able to wrap your thread around the post without it flopping over. And then when you wrap the hackle around the post, getting the thread underneath so it doesn't trap the hackle fibers.
So the only thing above the water is where the wing is.
Yeah, because when this thing floats on the surface, everything below the wing is going to be in the surface film and under the surface film. And the hackles are going to be splayed out horizontally across the surface film, which is what the adult fly does when it sits there. It's got legs that when the emerger's coming out, the legs sit out to the side and it creates sort of a dimple on the surface. But the body of the fly, as it's emerging, is still in the surface film or under the surface film. And I think that's what the trout are seeing, is that they're seeing the body of the fly with the dimples in the surface. They're not seeing the wing up above the surface. So. So that's it for today.
Nice flies, Dave.
Yeah, I like the way they look on the water. I think they just seem to float more than that.
Dave, just a question about the wrapping of the thread around the hackle. Were you going underneath the hook or were you keeping everything on top of the hook?
Everything on top of the hook.
Yeah.
So and that's the tricky part, is being able to wrap over top of the thorax and underneath the hackle around the post.
Right. Yeah.
So
Good.
you have to make sure that as you bring the thread around the front, it goes over top of the eye.
Right.
And then you pull it down so that it goes underneath everything and then over top of the hook at the back and down the other side. Same thing you did with the hackle. What that does is it forces each wrap to be under the previous wrap.
Mhm.
So it kind of forces the hackle and the remaining threads up the post, which strengthens the post so that it sticks up nice, but it also doesn't trap all the hackle fibers underneath.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Yeah.
Dave, you can stop recording.
Yep, we'll do that.
Yeah, you know,
Any questions, Jerry?